the most brutal punishments in human history. If you think modern punishments are bad, imagine living in a time where stealing a pair of shoes that look like this could get you boiled, flayed, or used as a public demonstration of what don't steal really meant. And the craziest part, nobody thought it was extreme. This was law written, approved, and carried out in front of cheering crowds, like it was halftime entertainment. Civilizations didn't just punish, they performed. And if you think you've heard the worst of it, you haven't. So today, we're ranking history's most creative ways to ruin a human life from Tier D to Tier S. Let's get into it. Let's start in Renaissance Europe, where the crime was taking too long to confess to, something you probably didn't do. When they got tired of asking nicely, they reached for the iron boot, a device made to crush legs until someone finally said something useful. Your leg would be forced into a heavy metal or wooden casing tight enough that you could feel the pressure even before the torture began. Then they hammered thick wedges of iron or wood into the gap between your shin and the boot. Each strike squeezed flesh, shattered bones, and turned your leg into pulp. Some versions even added red-hot coals inside the boot, so you'd be grilled and crushed at the same time. Technically, you could survive if you were fine with dragging around a leg that now functioned mostly as a decorative attachment. Now, we move to ancient Rome, where parasite, killing your own parent, was considered one of the worst crimes imaginable. The punishment was called paniculae, the punishment of the sack. The condemned was sewn into a leather bag along with a few random animals, usually a dog, a snake, a monkey, and a rooster, each one chosen because Romans thought they symbolized chaos and corruption. Once everyone was packed in, the sack was tied shut and thrown into a river. The logic was simple. If you turned against your own blood, you didn't deserve to die among men. Inside, it was chaos, biting, scratching, choking. You weren't just drowning. You were being mauled by 4 terrified animals that hated the situation as much as you did. Let's start in 17th century France, where parricide, killing your own father, wasn't just seen as a crime. It was treated as a cosmic offense, like slapping God in the face with a baguette. The punishment, the breaking wheel. You'd be tied to a massive wooden wheel, limbs split like a starfish, while executioners shattered your bones with iron clubs, limb by limb. They weren't trying to kill you fast. They were trying to keep you alive, just long enough to fold you like human origami between the spokes. Sometimes, they'd weave your body into the wheel and prop it up on display, letting the birds and sun finish the job. Now, shift to 10th century China under the Tang Dynasty, a time when the state treated rebellion not just as a crime, but as a chance to make an example. Those found guilty of high treason faced one of the most infamous execution methods in Chinese history, Lingchi, or death by 1,000 cuts. It was exactly what it sounded like, but far more calculated than chaotic. The condemned was tied to a wooden frame in a public space, surrounded by crowds. A government-appointed executioner would start with small, superficial cuts to the arms and legs, intentionally avoiding arteries. Over time, those shallow wounds turned into long, slow mutilation. Muscle, skin, and tendon were removed in stages, each slice measured to prolong suffering without causing death too quickly. The final cuts were often to the face, left until the end, so the crowd could watch the person suffer as themselves, not as an unrecognizable corpse. Sometimes their heart was only removed once the body had been reduced to near unconsciousness. We moved to the Ottoman Empire, a state that ruled through fear as much as power. Desertion from the military was seen as one of the worst betrayals imaginable, and the punishment for that betrayal was impalement. Victims were bound and hoisted above a sharpened wooden stake, then slowly lowered onto the point. The stake was often greased to control the descent, not for mercy but to prolong it. Executioners aimed to avoid major organs, letting the stake pass through the body inch by inch while keeping the victim alive. According to historical accounts, some endured the agony for more than 24 hours. In medieval France, especially between the 14th and the 16th centuries, castles weren't just homes for nobility, they were prisons. And one of the most feared parts of those prisons was the oubliette. The word comes from oublier, meaning to forget. That wasn't poetic exaggeration. That was the plan. Prisoners weren't meant to be rehabilitated or even executed. They were meant to disappear. An oubliette was a vertical shaft built into the floor of a dungeon, often only a few feet wide, lined with smooth stone and impossible to climb. You'd be lowered, or simply dropped in. The trapdoor slammed shut above you, and your world ended in darkness. Some were built so small you couldn't stand or stretch, forcing you into a crouched position until your legs seized and your spine gave out. Others ended in cesspits where you starved slowly while standing ankle deep in filth. You stayed until thirst, hunger, or madness killed you. And when it was finally over, your body was left to rot in the same darkness that had already consumed your mind. Now head to early Islamic Persia where an especially gruesome punishment awaited certain criminals, being sawn in half, not lengthwise, vertically. You'd be tied upside down, legs apart, head dangling toward the ground to keep blood in your brain, assuming you had one, because if you did, maybe you wouldn't be in this situation. Then, using a tomb and saw, the executioners would start at your groin and slowly cut down through your pelvis. Gravity helped, so did the fact that you stayed conscious longer than you'd want to. The spinal cord usually wasn't hit until halfway through. Until then, every nerve stayed online. England in the 1500s had a simple rule: betray the crown, and Jurgits become the entertainment. The crime was treason, and the punishment for that hanged, drawn, and quartered. A phrase that sounds poetic until you realize what it meant. First, you'd be dragged through the streets by horse tied to a board, face scraping dirt. Then, you'd be hanged, but not until death, just enough to make your eyes bulge and your lungs scream. Then came the real show. They'd slice open your abdomen and pull your intestines out by hand while you were still breathing. Sometimes they'd burn them right in front of you, just to remind you where disloyalty leads. Your head was then hacked off and your limbs chopped into four, nailed to city gates like grotesque road signs. Now to ancient Greece, where even engineers got creative with cruelty. The Brazen Bull designed by Pylos of Athens and gifted to the Sicilian tyrant Pharis. It was part execution device, part torture chamber, and part what happens when engineers get bored. The victim was locked inside a hollow bronze statue shaped like a bull. A fire was lit beneath it, heating the metal from the outside until it turned into a bronze oven. As the temperature climbed, skin blistered, lungs collapsed, and muscles tore themselves apart in the heat. The air inside filled with smoke and boiling breath. Every inhale cooked the lungs a little more. Every scream only sped up the burning. But that wasn't enough for Pharis.